Welcome to another Warhammer React. This time we're checking out my very first Arbiter Ian video, and it's the Horus Heresy in 40 minutes flat. So I'm excited to see a different perspective. Enjoy! Alright, okay. First video for the day. We are watching the Horus Heresy timeline in 40 minutes. I love things that are compressed. I know a fair bit about the Horus Heresy now, to be fair. I've been obsessively drowning myself in Warhammer content for what, like 3-4 months? But I have not watched Arbiter Ian. He's been really recommended a lot, actually. So I'm looking forward for the opportunity to actually get to hear him and see his type of content. I love his display in the background. My only complaint about him right now is I hate his color choices. I hate his top. I do. But other than that, it looks pretty good. So here we go.
The Horus Heresy is probably the biggest conflict in Warhammer 40,000's grimdark history.
I love him so much more just because he doesn't say 40k.
A decade-long civil war that ripped the galaxy asunder and shaped the Imperium for the next 10,000 years. Right. So, in this video, I'm going to go through the big picture. What happened and when, what battles were fought, and how Horus managed to burn a path all the way to terror.
I like his voice.
So the Horus Heresy is huge. It's the formative foundation myth of Warhammer 40,000's lore.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be distracted to start off with. Does he have Warhammer candles in the background? There's a Slanesh candle. There's a Siege candle. What does Tyranid smell like? I don't want to know what Slanesh smells like, because I'm sure that does not smell good, but what? Excuse me? All right, anyway, moving on.
Is huge. It's the formative foundation myth of Warhammer 40,000's lore. The Great Crusade of the Emperor fought in the 30th millennium to unite humanity under his rule, and led by his 18 Primarchs, collapses in the fires of betrayal as his favourite son, Horus Lupercal, falls to chaos and leads half the armies of the Imperium against him in a war fought across every sector of the galaxy. The results tear the nascent Imperium apart, shatter the dreams of the Emperor, and lead to 10,000 years of stagnation, repression, and decline.
You know, a question that I've never really asked before, despite the fact that I've learned a lot about the heresy. Did any planets align with chaos with Horus, right? Or was it all just tyranny? Like, we talk all the time about like what legions ended up siding with chaos under the banner of Horus, but like how many planets actually were just like, yeah, we also want to fall to chaos? I don't think any, but like we don't really talk about that. We don't really address that. At least in the span of like my time in this. Oh yes, definitely. A lot of people join Horus, tons of them. Yeah, okay, because that's something that like we've never really addressed. And, like, I would assume that they were just taken in under tyranny. But then again, he was so charismatic and loved, I would assume some planets would just willingly translate, would go over as well.
It's so huge that I've already done a load of videos on it. From retrospectives on how the story has evolved over the last 30 years, to lore videos on all the factions in it. But until relatively recently, it hasn't been that possible to tell the story of the whole thing in detail, because it didn't exist. But years of Black Library novels and Forge World gamebooks have allowed us to construct a pretty detailed picture, at least, of what happened in what year. And so in this, I'm going to try and tell the story from the start to the end. How Horus's initial decisions laid the plans for rebellion early on, and how a surprisingly dogged loyalist defense made it harder and harder for the traitors to hold it all together. But it's worth saying that the history of the Horus Heresy is still a work in progress. It's not real, so events are still being added, and it's such a big conflict that you can add your own. That's what a lot of the narrative gaming events that happen are for.
But everybody gets angry when things change. Yeah, but everybody gets angry when things change. What do you mean that I love his take on it, but it just seems like that would trigger people.
And of course, being so big and so embedded into the lore, there's a few different places you could start. Like most real-world wars, you can pick a number of dates as the start of the Horus Heresy, but I'm going to start this account at the turn of the 32nd millennium, in year 0 M31, as Horus Lupercal, Primarch of the Lunar Wolves, is named...
Wait, is that Abaddon in the background? I don't think I've ever seen a non-corrupt picture of Abaddon. I just the top knot gives it away. I have never seen him when he's not completely consumed by chaos.
Named War Master. But it's
Or
worth
juiced up from chaos, not
examining the
consumed.
world in which this happens. The Horus Heresy occurred towards the end of the 200-year-long Great Crusade. In the late 600s, M30, the Emperor had fought the unification wars on Earth, conquering the wasted planet and pushing out into the solar system. The nascent Imperium had forged a steady alliance with the tech priests of nearby Mars, absorbed the naval powers of Saturn and Jupiter, and pacified the Selenar gene cults on Luna, all of which allowed the construction of the great fleets and armies that the Emperor's plans required. The first expeditionary fleets of the Great Crusade departed the solar system in 798 M30, composed of ships new and...
I don't know how we're only 3 minutes in. Like I already have so many questions. Wait. Like, and mind you, again, like I've kind of dove into a fair bit of Warhammer. I didn't realize that a gene stealer cult ended up on Luna. So on the moon, right next to Terra. What? Is there a book for that? Because I actually don't remember hearing that. And if I did, it really didn't stick to me. That's really interesting. I would assume that would have been a very pivotal point. Blech.
Ancient and carrying hundreds of thousands of foot soldiers, headed by the pride of the Imperium, the 20 genetically engineered legions of the Legiones Astartes. Over the next 200 years, over 3,000 expeditionary fleets would conquer...
Oh, different group. They weren't gene stealers. They were human geneticists. Oh, okay. That's what I was going to say. I'm like a gene stealer cult on the moon seems like it would be kind of wild.
The galaxy, negotiating or forcing compliance on the scattered human colonies and empires they encountered, and fighting wars of extermination against alien species, with the Emperor at their head. Over time, the fleets discovered the 20 Primarchs, the Emperor's intended generals, and the genetic templates of the legions, who had been scattered during their creation, and they each took control of their legion, though 2 were lost in the alien wars to come. In order of discovery, these were
sadly.
Horus Lupercal of the 16th Legion Lunar Wolves on Chthoniya, Leman Russ of the 6th Legion Space Wolves on Fenris, Ferrus Manus of the 10th Legion Iron Hands on Medusa, Fulgrim of the 3rd Legion Emperor's Children on Chemos, Vulcan of the 18th Legion Salamanders on Nocturne, Rogel Dawn of the 7th Legion Imperial Fists on Inwit, Robut Gilliman of the 13th Legion Ultramarines on Macragge, Magnus the Red of the...
Oh, it actually shows you their, it shows you the entire regions that they have on the map too. That's the slightly faded bit. So he had Prospero and Chandar. Is that what they're showing for Magnus? That's so interesting. Oh my god, this map is cool.
Sons on Prospero. Sanguinius of the 9th Legion Blood Angels.
Wait. So Sanguinius' domain literally was only Baal? That's it? Really?
On Baal. Lion L. Johnson of the 1st Legion Dark Angels on Caliban, Perturabo of the 4th Legion Iron Warriors on Olympus, Mortarion of the 14th Legion Death Guard on Barbarous, Lorgar of the 17th Legion Word Bearers on Colchis, Jagatai Khan of the 5th Legion White Scars on Chogodis, Conrad Kurz of the 8th Legion Night Lords on Nostromo, Angron of the 12th Legion World Eaters on Nuceria, Corax of the 19th Legion Raven Guard on Deliverance, and finally, the twin Primarchs Alfarius Omegon of the 20th Alpha Legion. And they're pretty much going to be our cast for the rest of this. By the end of the 2nd century of the Crusade, in the late 900s M30, a tipping point had been reached. Humanity was the dominant force in the galaxy. The biggest alien threats, if not exterminated, then on their way there, and the completion of the Great Crusade all but inevitable. Of course, that isn't to say everything was perfect. Many of the Primarchs had been damaged by their experiences growing up, and some legions had considerable differences with mainstream Imperial culture. After a campaign at Zaramund, the Dark Angels had suffered such schism in their ranks that they effectively exiled a part of their legion, committing them to a permanent garrison on the homeworld of Caliban in 970 M30. The Night Lords and their Primarch were...
Not a big fan of... We don't care how people pronounce names. Look, different like accents are gonna say things differently, right? We always go into this like when I watch the Australian videos, right? And I say emu, and people are like, no, it's emu. It's like, no, we say emu. I don't judge you for saying emu. You shouldn't judge me for saying emu. Who cares?
A renegade legion in all but name, and after decades of torturous psychic visions and what they saw as betrayal by their home world, Nostramo, they returned and destroyed it in 984. Many of the Primarchs, especially the later discovered ones, harboured discontent at the methods of an emperor who, racing against time to complete his plans, had thrown them into the Crusade at the head of an unfamiliar army with barely any time for them to acclimatise to this new Imperium. The most egregious example of this was Lorgar, Primarch of the Word-Bearers, who defied the Imperial truth, the Emperor's decree that the Imperium would be secular. All religion and worship was banned in the Imperium, part of the Emperor's plan to defeat the dark forces of chaos that preyed upon humanity. But Lorgar was a man of faith, and had spent a good portion of the Crusade indoctrinating the worlds he conquered into the belief that the Emperor was a god. When the truth was finally revealed, the Emperor punished and humiliated Lorgar, and while on the surface the Primarch repented, in secret he just turned to the worship of the dark powers of the warp instead. By the end of the 30th millennium,
like I said, I like Lorgar. Again, I know it's heretical in its own way, but like, it's such a piss baby move. It's such a piss baby move. Be like, oh, I've been disciplined. Oh, I'm gonna just undermine you completely, and we're gonna worship the other gods with blackjack and hookers.
Far away at the edge of the Crusade, Lorgar and his word-bearers had fallen completely to the worship of chaos and had started to put plans in motion for the overthrow of the Imperium. Horus Lupercal was the greatest of the Primarchs. Leader of the 16th Legion, the Lunar Wolves, he'd been with the Emperor since almost the start of the Crusade. A peerless leader and diplomat, one of the few amongst his brothers who could command all their respect. But the opening years of the 31st millennium would see his slow fall from grace. The Orc Empire of Ulanor was the final great alien.
No. He's not the most fun to hate. Most fun to hate is Vulcan, because it makes everybody get riled up. Lorgar is just, he's designed to hate. I don't think that there are people who I think some people actually unironically like him too. I think that he's important, and he serves a very important purpose rather, but like, it's just, he's just a little goofy goober. He's just a little goofy goober.
Threat to the Imperium. And in the opening year of M31, the Imperium laid it waste. 100,000 Astartes, including elements from the White Scars, the Ultramarines, and the Lunar Wolves, led by Horus and the Emperor himself, and supported by millions more human troops, defeated the Orc warlord Urlak Urg and fractured his empire. In celebration, the Emperor declared a great triumph to be held, to recognize the glory of the Crusade, and it was attended by every martial force of the Imperium, including representatives from every legion and 9 of the Primarchs. And at this triumph, the Emperor declared his retirement from the Crusade. Time was still against him, and he had other tasks to achieve if humanity would be safe, and so, with the Crusade now unstoppable, he named Horus the War Master of the Imperium, in charge of prosecuting the Crusade to the very end. The Emperor himself would return to Terra to complete work on his secret Webway project, an attempt to release humanity from its dependence on dangerous interstellar warp travel. There was little disagreement. Some of the Primarchs might have considered themselves the better claimant to such a role.
Is that Ferrus Manus? Did Ferrus Manus think that he should be the War Master? Really? Really?
But Horus was loved by all, and his brothers pretty much fell in line as the Crusade continued. Over the next couple of years, Horus commanded the trajectory of the Crusade with ease. The White Scars hunted the remnants of the Orc Empire into the isolated Chondak system, and the rest of the legions ventured off again into the darkness. The Emperor stayed true to his word, only emerging again in 01.
Alright, sorry to pause again. I'm not trying to pause a ton, but like, I need to address this. I have always felt this way, but I have never addressed how awful this picture is. This picture bothers me, and I don't know why. I do know. The eyes on the Emperor in this picture are so strange. They're so strange. And it's like if you cover the eyes with your hand, normal face. But those eyes are not human eyes. It's really uncomfortable.
On M31 for the Council of Nicaea to resolve the question of the use of psychic powers by the legions. The Primarchs Magnus the Red, Sanguinius, and Jagatai Khan advocated for these new librarius departments, but the Emperor sided with the detractors, Liman Russ and Mortarion, and officially banned the use of psychic powers by the legions before returning to Terra to continue his work. This caused no small measure of upset, but the departure of the Emperor coincided with a few other developments that strained the legions. The Emperor's children enacted the cleansing of the Xenos planet of Leran, defeating the alien Leia within a month, but the influence of the Leia caused the Legion's apothecaries to start experimenting with the Legion's gene seed in imitation, and the sword their Primarch Fulgrim took from the wreckage of the civilization was an ancient demon blade that began his long corruption. And on the planet of Nerth, the Alpha...
I think it was with Pancreas I was having this conversation. That blade is ridiculous. The fact that Fulgrim couldn't tell the difference between his own inner thoughts and a blade whispering obscenities to him is still like really insane to me. Ferrus Manus was highly qualified for the role. He had iron hands, and was named the Iron Hand and the Fist of Iron, and had a sweet hammer. You know what? That sounds pretty handy. Sounds pretty irony. The irony of that being so handy.
Legion were brought into contact with a group of ancient Xenos species known as the Cabal, who warned them of the upcoming war and how, in their opinion, the triumph of Horus would actually save the galaxy by destroying humanity once and for all. But both of these paled to the fall of Horus himself. As War Master, Horus was already under pressure, but he also felt for the first time abandoned and not a little resentful of his father, and of this changing Imperium. For centuries, the Imperium was the Primarchs and the Crusade, but with the new Council of Terror taking control of compliance systems, with remembrancers moving through the fleets to document their actions, and with the Emperor gone to apparently more important matters, what the Astartes and the Primarchs would do once it was all over started to weigh on all their minds. Horus wanted a legacy. Initially, he tried magnanimity. When his crusade fleet encountered the civilized...
Wait. I know that's the act of being magnanimous, but I've never heard that. Hang on.
Initially, he tried magnanimity. When his crusade fleet encountered the sea. Initially, he tried magnanimity.
Magnanimity.
His crusade fleet encountered the civilized Interrex in 002. Horus chose to overlook their alliance with alien species in the name of collaboration, despite his commander's calls for war. But when an ancient demon weapon, preserved by the Interrex as a warning from history, was stolen during the negotiations and war inevitably occurred, his plans for a new way of running the crusade were shattered. With some Primarchs still chafing at the new commander and seeking to visibly reinforce his authority, he finally gave in to a request by the Emperor in 03 and renamed his legion the Sons of Horus. But the turning point was still to come. Unknown to Horus, it was the chaplain Erebus of the Word-Bearers who had stolen that demon weapon.
It's everybody's favorite boy! Look at him! He's just a quirky little guy with the poop dagger.
From the Interrex. In 04, he gave the Anathame weapon to Eugen Temba, human commander of the world of Davin, whose disappointment at being left behind by the Crusade was exploited by the weapon, which overcame and possessed him. Erebus then called Horus to Davin on a matter of urgency and manipulated him into leading the assault on Temba's position himself. While Horus killed the mutant...
Do they ever address how, I'm sure they do in the books, how did Erebus matter enough, right? He's a chaplain of the Word-Bearers. How does a chaplain of the Word-Bearers have enough sway to get the War Master of the Primarchs to be able to go to a planet personally? Doesn't that sound like a little bit nonsensical? I would assume that Horus wouldn't really care of the words of a different legion's chaplain, especially to be personally bothered. It is addressed, okay.
Thing that Temper had become, he was mortally wounded by the Anathame in return. Far from support, and with the War Master dying of an unknown warp illness, the distraught Sons of Horus gave in to Erebus's suggestion that Horus be handed over to the Serpent Lodge for a spiritual cure, something many of them were very uncomfortable with, especially because it turned out to be a chaos-worshipping cult kept alive in secret by the Word-Bearers on that planet. Inside the Serpent Lodge of Davin, Erebus's devotion to chaos was revealed, and the Chaos Powers showed Horus a dark future, where the Emperor was worshipped as a god, and Horus was forgotten, claiming this was the Emperor's plan all along. The Primarch Magnus the Red, far away on Prospero, illegally used his psychic powers to try and wake Horus to keep him from falling, but he was rejected, and for whatever reason, whether his growing discontent or his manipulation by the powers of chaos, Horus fell.
One important part missing is that Erebus Machiavelli'd for years to put himself as Horus's main advisor. Oh, see, that is a big deal to me. That changes a lot. So I had no idea about this bit. So that bit. So that makes way more sense if he was put up as a position of being an advisor.
For the rest of 04, Horus recovered and moved swiftly to secure his position before he chose to reveal this new treachery. But he wasn't the only one moving swiftly. After Horus's rejection of Magnus's pleas, Magnus decided that the Emperor needed to be warned. Seeking to prove how useful his psychic powers could be, he enacted a ritual to project his spirit form into the Emperor's throne room to warn him of Horus's treachery, but the plan backfired.
Ooh, that sounds like a massive backfire. Ooh. Lorgar infiltrated all the legions with warrior lodges, basically a boys' club where rank was left at the door and thoughts could be voiced freely. It was the primary vector of general trader ideas. Oh, okay. I see. I'm learning new things today. I'm learning a lot of... We're what, like 20 minutes into the video? I feel like I've learned more than I have in like the last week.
Fired. The message was lost, and the psychic intrusion broke the seals on the Webway project, which was then invaded by hordes of warp demons as the war in the Webway broke out. The effort required to keep the demons at bay would see the Emperor confined to the Golden Throne for the rest of the war, lest the whole of Terra be lost to chaos. Furious, the Emperor demanded Magnus and his legion be brought before him in chains and tasked Leman Russ and his Space Wolves to do this. But Horus was already in the process of planning his first open moves and took advantage. As War Master, the orders came through him, and he made it clear that Magnus was to be killed. And so, during the Battle of Prospero, the loyal Space Wolves Legion almost destroyed the loyal Thousand Suns Legion, laid waste to their planet, and broke the back of Magnus, who managed to spirit away the final remnants of his legion to a planet deep within the Eye of Terror. With nowhere else to go, the Thousand Suns would eventually end up siding with the traitors. Meanwhile, Horus was using his position.
Okay. I mean, now it makes a lot more sense. I still don't like the Thousand Suns, but like that makes way more sense. But I don't know. I somehow I don't feel like that the mental gymnastics of being like, well, I got betrayed by the people I tried to help. Let me just go against them. I still feel like if you have a moral compass, that wouldn't be the answer. But you know, to each their own.
As War Master to show favor to his potential allies. He provoked war with the advanced Orician technocracy, using the rare technology they possessed as a bargaining chip to turn Mars and the Mechanicum to his side. He favored the Emperor's Children, Death Guard, World Eaters, Iron Warriors, and Night Lords with better resupplies, even encouraging the Iron Warriors in the destruction of their homeworld, Olympia. And as the year turned to...
Magnus attempts to physically prevent Horus from falling to corruptions and fails. Tries to warn the Emperor about Horus and explodes the Webway. Rip. Yeah, exploding the Webway is pretty bad, though. It's pretty bad. I feel like considering that all this stuff took years, right? Like, Horus was corrupted for years before he revealed, and we had the Isfahan incidents, right? Like, this was going on not in the span of, like, days. Couldn't Magnus have just gone to the Emperor himself? Instead of trying to take a shortcut through the Webway with the astral projection, couldn't he have just gone in person and then like avoided all of this? So we could argue that Magnus potentially let everything happen. Like he potentially let everything happen.
2005, he dispatched those he thought would remain loyal on campaigns to the furthest edges of the galaxy. The Blood Angels were sent to Cygnus Prime, officially to confront the Xenos Nephilim, but they became embroiled in a war against a horde of demons and lost from communication with the rest of the Imperium. The powerful Dark Angels Legion was sent to the far-off eastern fringes on crusades of conquest, and the Ultramarines, the largest of the legions, were ordered to muster in their own domains, also on the eastern fringe, ahead of a huge apparent war of conquest to come. Finally, with his pieces in position, in 05, Horus Horus gathered 4 legions to the rebellious world of Istvan III, officially to put down the rebellion in a show of strength, but in reality, this was his chance to rid his allies of their more loyalist elements. The Sons of Horus, Death Guard, World Eaters, and Emperor's Children deployed those units and officers they felt would never turn to the surface to crush the rebellion, and then annihilated the planet with virus bombs from orbit. The intention was that this too would be a secret, but when the survivors managed to hide out in the underground shelters of the planet and the war dragged on the surface...
Look, let's be real, Dolphins. Horus should have been scared of the lion. Johnson would dumpster him, okay? I don't care that I'm a fangirl. He would dumpster him.
One ship managed to escape. The Eisenstein, commanded by the loyalist Death Guard Captain Nathaniel Garrow, eventually managed to reach Terra and inform the Imperium of the betrayal. The news was out. Horus and 3 other legions had turned traitor. The Imperium, led by the Primarch Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists, attempted to formulate a response. The Blood Angels and the...
Wait. Didn't Rogel, Didn't Rogel threaten to kill this guy? Didn't Dorn threaten to kill the messenger, saying there's no way that my brothers would have betrayed me, you fool? Like that type of thing, right? What, didn't he get super angry and knocked over his train set? Garrow is baller. Yeah. But I remember hearing in one of the previous videos, right, that Dorn he couldn't believe it, so it was outside of his realm of perception for a bit. He almost killed him? Oh, yeah, that's what I thought.
Marines were still out of contact at the edges of the Imperium. The Dark Angels were embroiled against the Gordian League on Diamat, and the White Scars were still prosecuting the Chondax campaign, kept artificially isolated from communication by Horus. As such, a retribution fleet was assembled from the legions that were contactable, smaller legions that Horus had left in the relative center of the Imperium. And this fleet was tasked with blockading the Istvan system and bringing the traitor legions to justice. The Iron Hands, Raven Guard, and Salamanders would arrive first and await reinforcements from the Word Bearers, Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Alpha Legion, and finally the Imperial Fists, making the long journey from Terra. But as the forces moved into position, rebellions broke out elsewhere. In late 05, the Schism of Mars began as the Fabricator Generals sided with Horus and an oily civil war erupted.
Okay, so here's what we were asking about early in the video. This explains a lot. I could have just waited. This is one of those times where those commenters who are going type, just wait until they'll answer it. Blah, 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 blah. You be right today.
The Imperial Fists had to divert forces to rescue war material from the planet, while their section of the Retribution Fleet was becalmed in the warp and made no progress to Istvan. At the Istvan system, the Raven Guard, Salamanders, and Iron Hands arrived in early 06 under the command of the Iron Hands Primarch, Ferrus Manus, but he was so incensed by the betrayal, he opted to make immediate planetfall against the traitor defenses prepared on the world of Istvan V, instead of waiting for the full Imperial response to arrive. The initial assault consisted of the majority of the Raven Guard and Salamander's legions, assisted by the elite of the Iron Hands, and it pushed into the Urgal Depression, facing the guns of the Sons of Horus, World Eaters, Death Guard, and Emperor's Children. But as their reinforcements landed behind them, the battle turned into a massacre. The second wave, the Word Bearers, Alpha Legion, Iron Warriors, and Night Lords, revealed their loyalty to Horus, and the Loyalists were cut down in a brutal crossfire. Ferrus Manus was killed by his brother Fulgrim, and the majority of the Raven Guard and Salamander's legions were slaughtered. The Primarch of the Salamanders, Vulcan, was...
Actual Ferrus lore. That's the only bit of lore I've ever heard about Ferrus Manus, other than the theory that his hands are from Necroderm from the Necrons, and the fact that he dies to Fulgrim, right? Or that he made Fulgrim's original sword, right? And that the hammer was made by Fulgrim, right? And they swapped weapons. And but that's it. It's all Fulgrim lore. It's all Fulgrim lore.
Was taken prisoner by Conrad Kurz of the Night Lords, and the Primarch of the Raven Guard, Corax, fought a weeks-long guerrilla war in the rubble before being rescued by his own fleet.
I hate his
With
hair.
this move, the battle lines had been drawn. 9 legions had sided with Horus, and they'd succeeded in killing one Primarch, capturing another, and almost destroying 2 entire Loyalist legions. But the Loyalists fought back wherever they could. The remnants of the Salamanders and the Raven Guard, along with the leaderless companies of the Iron Warriors, would continue to harass the traitor forces for the rest of the war, as the guerrilla companies known as the Shattered Legions, picking up isolated loyalist elements.
Ferris is my favorite plot device in Fulgrim's lore. That is so savage. Holy crap.
As they went. And while the main Imperial Fist's fleet never reached Ispan, a separate fleet managed to blockade the Sons of Horus' home planet of Chthoniya and fought a brutal war through the tunnels and caverns of the planet for the rest of the conflict. Though the heresy was revealed, the Loyalists were still largely on the back foot, so Horus dispatched his allies to reinforce his initial advantage.
Okay, I need to quickly just run to the door real fast. I'm gonna put on some music. Guys, be on your best behavior, and mods, please timestamp this so I can edit it out later. Be right back. My food that was delivered was completely the wrong order. Hang on. Oh my goodness. I want to be quick. Everything's being slow today. I have some random order for somebody else. Alfarius, this is a very Alfarius thing to do. Can you call them? I'm trying. Ah, this is so annoying. This is so stupid. I have to order it again. I have to, let me just make sure that it didn't charge, that I got my money back. Yeah, okay, I can order it again. It's so silly. All right, well, I guess I have extra stuff. I guess it's the most random thing ever. I got some like rotisserie chicken thing. I'm like, I ordered a pizza. It's like, this isn't a pizza, this is a rotisserie chicken. I find it funny. I almost want to leave this in the VOD just because of how stupid this is. Like, I just almost want to leave it. Free food. I don't want to eat this. It doesn't look that good. It doesn't look anywhere near as good as it should. So stupid. Ah! Okay, hold on. Let me reorder. Let me reorder. And we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this, and proceed to checkout. Pizza's out of stock. I'll tell you guys what I got in a second. Give me 1 second. It's so silly. I'm being punished, right? Because as a New Yorker, I shouldn't ever do this. I wanted a Detroit pizza, so I ordered a Detroit pizza in New York. So I am being punished for my choices here. What is this? This looks awful. I hate this. I don't know what these things are. I do not know what this is. Well, let me go and give Yura one of the things in here. She'll probably like this at least. Hang on, let me go bother Yura. Here you go. The new order's on the way. Have a mango shake. From some Mexican place. Alright, she's content. She's content. Little C. No. I wouldn't. Why would Little Caesars? Absolutely not. I live in New York City. Why would I get Little Caesars? There's nothing wrong with it, I guess, but like, I have good pizza. All right, going back to the video. We'll probably, maybe we'll leave that in there. We'll know if people actually watch through the video if they see that section, because we're like 20 minutes in, right? So anybody who's a butthead's not gonna really comment on that stuff anyway. All right, let's go back to the video.
At the end of 06, hot on the heels of the drop site massacre, the Alpha Legion assaulted and seized Paramar and, accompanied by elements of the Emperor's Children, the system of Beta Garman, both of which would be strategically important for the traitors' eventual march on Terra. The Sons of Horus, aided by the Death Guard, assaulted the valuable industrial sectors of the Coronid Deeps, starting the Manichaean War as they attempted to turn the vital forge worlds of the area to their cause. All three of these conflicts would persist for years. Much of the Imperium was still in darkness. The Blood Angels had defeated the hordes of demons on Cygnus Prime, though they were shaken by the first mass appearance of what would later become known as the Red Thirst. And the Dark Angels, attacked by a rogue Sons of Horus fleet in the Rangda system, had been alerted to the events of Istvan, but Horus still had plans to unfurl. In 07, the Night Lords were dispatched to the Eastern Fringe to draw the Dark Angels into a series of conflicts across the Ultima Segmentum known as the Thramas Crusade. Conrad Kurz and his legion caused chaos and distraction on Sagwalsa and across the Triplex and Thramas sectors, keeping the Dark Angels occupied for the next few years. Meanwhile, Lorgar and his word-bearers made their way to the great Ultramarines muster point at Calth. One of the few areas of the galaxy still in the dark about the heresy, the Ultramarines and their Primarch, Robert Gilliman, had been ordered by Horus to gather their forces and await reinforcement from the word-bearers before pushing outwards to contest a nearby area of the galaxy held by orcs. At the orbital shipyards of Calth, the word-bearers betrayed the Ultramarines, opening fire and destroying hundreds of ships and raining debris down on the planet. So this is where that scene comes from. Dedicating
that's where the scene of Gilliman punching Space Marines' heads off in space.
To the gods of the warp, the word-bearers enacted a dark ritual that saw Calth's sun poisoned and raised the Ruin Storm, a great warp storm that would keep the Eastern Fringe isolated from the rest of the Imperium, with the Dark Angels, Ultramarines and Blood Angels trapped on the far side. At the same time, traitor Titan legions mustering with the World Eaters on Ithaca as part of the same push turned on the loyalist Legio Praesagius. The conflicts at Calth and Ithaca became the beginnings of the Crusade of Iron, as the remnants of Presidius sought revenge for the betrayal at Ithaca, and the Shadow Crusade, as word-bearers and world-eaters, under the command of their primarchs Lorgar and Angron, rampaged across Ultramar, all in revenge for the word-bearers' humiliation at the hands of the Ultramarines all those years ago. But they weren't the only legion looking for revenge. The Iron Warriors, leaving Istvan, took the opportunity to attack their old rivals, the Imperial Fists, first assaulting the becalmed
even knowing all this part, like knowing all this stuff with Perturabo, I still can never get over just how petulant he is.
Retribution fleet during the Battle of the Fall system, and then assaulting the Imperial Fists garrison on Hydra Caudatus. Linking up with the Emperor's children and their primarch, Fulgrim, they then journeyed deep into the Eye of Terror on a quest to find the weapon known as the Angel Exterminatus. But Fulgrim betrayed Perturabo on the Chrome world of Idris, attempting to sacrifice him to fuel his own ascension to demonhood.
Right, I
Perturabo
remember that.
escaped, but Fulgrim was still transformed into a demon prince of Slanesh. By this point, the heresy was fully revealed, and with it, war broke out across the galaxy as Astartes, human, and Mechanicum forces all declared either for the Loyalists or the traitors. But there was one legion that still hadn't declared. Still on campaign, hunting the Orcs of Chondax, the White Scars had been kept in the dark by the Alpha Legion, who'd been blocking all communication.
Right, so we know
in and
this
out
part.
of the
This
system.
is when he
But
makes
the
the
Alpha
decision
Legion
of
were
waiting,
not
right?
as united as they appeared, and during the Tenebrae mission, the Primarch Omegon dispatched a force of legionnaires to destroy the Legion's own blocking station, allowing news of the heresy to filter through. Confused, the White Scars and their Primarch Jagatai Khan broke through the Alpha Legion blockade and made all speed to Prospero, attempting to verify the rumours they'd been fed that the Space Wolves had turned traitor and destroyed the Thousand Suns. In the second Battle of Prospero, they fought past Death Guard forces led by Mortarion and discovered one of the broken shards of Magnus the Red in the ruins, and learning the truth, the White Scars declared for the Emperor. They'd fight a fast-paced guerrilla war across the Imperium for the next few years as they
I'm sorry, but that ship is so inappropriate looking.
attempted to make the journey back to Terra. As well as the White Scars, the Alpha Legion also waylaid and ambushed the Space Wolves in the Alaxes Nebula, who were coming to realise that they had also been tricked. Also, planning to return to Terra, they were only able to begin their journey when the Dark Angels starfought Chimera, loyal to the Lutherian exiles on Caliban, but totally unaware of the heresy, broke the Alpha Legion blockade of the Nebula. Finally, through the whole of 07, the Loyalists attempted to fight back. Corax of the Raven Guard travelled to Terra and was gifted rare genetic technology by an embattled emperor, which he then attempted to use to hothouse New Astartes on his Legion base of Deliverance. However, the project had yet again been infiltrated by the Alpha Legion, who seemed really well prepared for this. And the resulting Astartes, created by the Sabotage Project, were horrifically mutated, while the Alpha Legion made off with the genetic samples. Putting aside the project, as 7 turned to 8, the Raven Guard launched into a new wave of guerrilla assaults on Scarato, Constantin and Carandiru, as other shattered Legion forces were starting to seriously hamper the traitor advance. The war in the Corinid Deeps concluded with the taking of the Forge world of Mezoa, and then the fall of Manichaea itself, freeing the War Master's forces up to push onwards, but a shattered Legion force led by the Iron Hand Shadrach Meduson held out on the planet of Dwell, and used their position to lure the War Master into an assassination attempt. Later in the year, a second attempt would be made on the War Master's life by an execution force of Imperial assassins on the world of Dagonet, leading to brutal reprisals by the Sons of Horus across the Imperium. The Iron Hands clan Morrigal, led by Ortek Moore, annihilated the World Eaters recruiting world of Bolt, and far away on Perditus, the Dark Angels came to the aid of an Iron Hands force fighting Kalas Typhon and his Death Guard, and came away with the mysterious Tukulka device, which allowed them to navigate with some success through the warp storm.
Wait. Isn't that the engine that is completely overpowered? Doesn't it bypass the laws of physics in this world? I forgot what it's called, the Chulk engine, right? But I don't remember it specifically. I just remember something about it being completely absurd. But I could be misremembering. That's very possible. I could very well be misremembering. And hello, my cats are all climbing up on the table.
Of the Eastern Fringe. Also beyond the Ruinstorm, the Shadow Crusade came to its conclusion on the world of Nuceria, the homeworld of Angron.
Yeah, the
As
one
the
Vastra stole,
Wordbearers
right.
and World Eaters destroyed the planet's population, they came under attack by an Ultramarines reprisal fleet led by Guilliman, and in the resulting slaughter, Lorgar attempted to save his brother Angron by turning him into a demon prince of Khorne. The end of the Shadow Crusade was then followed by the end of the Crusade of Iron at the Battle of Druth II, where both the Loyalist and traitor Titan commanders were killed. Elsewhere, the fires of war continued to burn. On Calth, a brutal underground war emerged between the Ultramarine and Wordbearer forces stranded during the betrayal, unable to set foot outside because of the poisoned sun. Loyalist and traitor Titans fought over the Mydran system. Mechanicum civil war erupted through the Forge worlds of Anvilus, and the traitor fleet besieged important loyal...
See, I feel like a lot of these details are really overlooked when you get like the general information of the Horus Heresy, right? Like, this is still a very abridged version, right? This is still a very, very abridged version. Yet a lot of the stuff that I've not heard sounds incredibly interesting. Like, almost more interesting than some of the stuff that I've heard constantly regurgitated.
Worlds, the Blood Angels' homeworld of Baal that had become something of a bastion of defiance for those loyalists who escaped Istvan, and the Imperial Fist's homeworld of Inwit were both blockaded by traitor fleets in 08 and 09. As the traitors were mostly freed from conflict in the Coronid Deeps, the Solar Auxilia Marshal Ayatan Masad had rallied Imperial forces at Numenal and Agathon, but the major Forge worlds had all fallen into the traitors' hands. Horus set his sights on the next step of his plan, the Night World of Molech, the site of a gateway into the realm of chaos, one that the Emperor had used thousands of years previously to steal knowledge from the Chaos powers. Horus would need to make a similar bargain if he wished to defeat the Emperor. A huge invasion was launched in 09, headed by the Sons of Horus and the Death Guard under Mortarion, where the first Plague Marines saw battle. Though the capital of Lupercalia was heavily defended by Knights, Blood Angels, and Ultramarines, it eventually fell when the Night House Divine turned traitor. At the same time, on the far western edge of the galaxy, the traitor...
The 40k fandom focuses on Primarchs and Space Marines when they're generally some of the least interesting in the actual stories. Yeah, I was gonna say, some of these Civil Wars sound really, really cool.
Forge world of Zana suffered numerous raids, first by emerging Black Shield forces, Marine forces that fought on neither side for the heresy, and then by a Dark Angels force who recovered Ordinatus engines intended for the Sons of Horus. The chaos on that world would lead to the release of the tech heretic Anacharis Scoria and the eventual transformation of the planet into the first of the Hell Forges. The Dark Angels were also active beyond the Ruinstorm. Aided by the Tukulka device, they finally managed to scatter the Night Lord's fleet at Sheol 9, their Primarch, Kurz, eventually escaping to the depths of the Dark Angels' flagship, the Invincible
my God,
Reason.
this part, yeah.
With the Night Lords...
See, now it's getting to the point where we know, right? Like, where we know what is going to happen, where it's, at least between these two, between... Lionel Johnston and Conrad Kurz.
Longer a threat, the fleet headed through the warp storms towards Ultramar, where the warp beacon of the Pharos had been lit on Sotha by scattered Imperial Fists and Loyalist Iron Warriors working alongside the Ultramarines. Over the course of the next year, more and more scattered Loyalist elements would arrive in the Ultramarines' domain, following the signal beacon of the Pharos, including the Blood Angels fleet, still attempting to return from Cygnus. This would lead to one of the more controversial events of the period. Unaware of if the Imperium even still existed beyond the Ruinstorm, and fearing that the Emperor had already been defeated, Guilliman declared Imperium
Secundus,
a new Imperium, with Sanguinius...
Wait, so I didn't realize this too. I thought that he created the Imperium Secundus as kind of a proxy state because he just didn't... because they needed to have some level of control in this region, right? I didn't know he did it out of fear that everything was already shit. I didn't realize he thought that everything was already done. Or potentially thought everything was done.
Of the Blood Angels as its Emperor, and Lion L. Johnson of the Dark Angels as its Lord Protector, neither of whom were particularly comfortable with the idea, even if they understood its reason for existing. After a brief incident in which Conrad Kurz escaped the Dark Angels flagship and caused terror across the capital of Macragge, eventually resulting in the partial...
He's such a gremlin. I love Conrad Kurz, but he's such a damn gremlin.
destruction of the Pharos device at the Battle of Sotha, he was captured and imprisoned by the Loyalists, who also rediscovered the body of Vulcan, Primarch of the Salamanders, incoherent and barely aware since his escape from the Night Lord's flagship at Thramas. The following year, in Year 10, the Salamanders present in the Imperium Secundus would battle through the Ruinstorm to return their Primarch to their homeworld of Nocturne, defeating the Death Guard during the Battle of Nocturne, and eventually resurrecting Vulcan. Existing conflicts exploded across the Belt of Iron, a region of space held by several prized Forge worlds. Religious differences pulled more and more of the Mechanicum into a conflict that became known as the Cataclysm of Iron, which eventually involved the worlds of Urdesh, Atar Median, Graia, Calabrax, and Valia Maximal, and their respective Titan legions. Another major theatre opened on the planet of Talon, as the Iron Warriors, finally escaping...
Sorry, I just saw that I'm reading their books. They're pretty good if you are a Night Lord fan. The problem is I have too many books to read right now. I have the audio books for Caiaphas Cain and Gaunt's Ghosts. I have the Son of the Forest I need to read. I have the new Alpha Legion book coming. And I also have all of the Arcs of Omen that need to be read.
From the Eye of Terror, laid waste to the planet in the hope of capturing the Black Oculus, an ancient artifact buried beneath its surface. Virus bombs turned the once verdant world into an endless desert. The Loyalist forces forced to fight from within sealed vehicles in what would become the biggest tank engagement of the Horus Heresy. Elsewhere, the Loyalists went on the offensive, Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists organising a massive counter-offensive on the war-racked world of Beta Garment, the largest concentration of Loyalist forces in the galaxy at that time, led by the Imperial Fists and the Salamanders, pushed out the Emperor's Children garrison at the First Battle of Nearcon and left the system in Imperial hands, though a traitor counterattack would start before the end of the year as Horus finally started his push towards Terra. And as the traitors realigned towards their goal, the Solar War began, as Alpha Legion forces started to test the defenses of the solar system itself. The first major conflict of which was the Battle of Pluto, as over 200 Alpha Legion ships assaulted the Imperial monitoring stations there. The battle was ended when Rogel Dawn killed the Primarch Alfarius, scattering the Alpha Legion fleet, but raids and attacks would continue for the next few years. But as the traitors started to gather for the push to Terra, so did the disparate Loyalists. In 11, the White Scars, still searching for a route back to Terra while conducting a hit-and-run campaign for the last 4 years, made two major advances. First against the Emperor's Children at the Battle of the Callium Gate, and then against the Death Guard during the Battle of Catalyst, where they activated an ancient dark glass array and managed to traverse the Webway and return to Terra. While at a similar time, Vulcan of the Salamanders used an alternate webway path to get from the Battle of Nocturne to the heart of the Imperial Palace. But the biggest concentration of Loyalist forces were still stranded out on the eastern fringe, after numerous visions convinced them that the Emperor and the Imperium did still survive. Guilliman, Sanguinius, and the Lion dissolved the Imperium Secundus and attempted to break through the Ruinstorm. Encountering numerous traitor and demonic fleets during the battles of Anari and Piran, the three legions eventually came to the centre of the Ruinstorm at Davin. During the Second Battle of Davin, against a huge demonic incursion, the Loyalist fleet bombarded the planet with cyclonic torpedoes, weakening the Ruinstorm and opening a
Dare I ask, what is a cyclonic torpedo? Is it just a psyker torpedo?
Route through, though it was blockaded by a traitor fleet. Cutting their losses, the Ultramarines and the Dark Angels fleets opted to engage and distract the traitors so that the Blood Angels could make it through to Terra. By 12, the Battle of Talon ended as Horus consolidated his forces and pulled Perturabo and his Iron Warriors away, and with Loyalist forces gathering, they once again went on the offensive. During the Battle of Trizolian, Liman Russ and the Space Wolves Legion ambushed Horus's flagship anchored above Trizolian 4A, and the two Primarchs fought in the depths of Horus's flagship, but while Russ managed to wound Horus, he was seriously injured in return, and with Russ unconscious, his legion were forced to pull back to Yarant, with the traitor forces in pursuit. They were eventually rescued by Korax and the Raven Guard, but they suffered horrific losses, eventually pushing them out of the war. And with the Ruinstorm weakening, the Dark Angels took advantage of clearing space lanes to engage in a campaign of retribution.
Loyalists really got screwed. Like, I know it's like an obvious statement, but like you think about each individual scenario and like everything went to crap for the Loyalists. Like, oh my god.
Against the traitors across the Southern Imperium, destroying the Legion homeworlds of Chemos and Barbarous as the Ultramarines continued to press on through the remaining storm, slowly advancing on Terra. Rogel Dawn mustered even more forces on Beta Garmin, including huge numbers of Titan legions as
I'm trying to think of like a good analogy for it, where it's like, yeah, even though Horus was killed, it's like, yeah, you have a bowl of punch, right? You know, Horus took a massive turd in the bowl of punch. You clean out, you finish everything, you clean the bowl of punch out, but even when you fill it back up with punch, you still have the knowledge that that turd was left in the bowl of punch. There's still remnants of fecal matter in that bowl of punch that Horus left for you. So it's like, it was a perfectly fine bowl of punch. Horus didn't need to drop a steaming turd in it. Yet he still chose to. For chaos.
Horus, despite his wounds, committed to a major assault on the system with his own Titan legions. Eventually, Beta Garmin became one of the biggest and most destructive theatres of the campaign. This part of the war dubbed the Titan Death for the numbers of losses suffered by the legios of both sides. The war on Beta Garmin continued into 13, both sides pouring forces into the fray, including fleets from the Blood Angels and the White Scars arriving to attempt to hold the traitors until the Ultramarine fleet could force a path through. But while the traitors continued to fight, their high command was falling apart. Horus, succumbing to his wounds, fell into a coma. Disgusted by this and rethinking his decision to corrupt Horus all those years ago, Lorgar of the Wordbearers attempted to usurp control of the traitor forces, summoning Angron to his side and journeying into the warp to bring Fulgrim back to real space. But Horus eventually rallied, casting Lorgar down, exiling him, and taking control of the remaining Wordbearers through Wordbearers officers still loyal directly to him. With traitor forces back under the control of the War Master and the Ultramarines still struggling through the storms, delayed by engagements with the Alpha Legion, the Loyalists finally cut their losses and quit the ruined Beta Garmin system, pulling back to Terra and the Solar System for the final phase of the war as the traitor forces mustered for their last push at Ullanor, where this story started 13 years before. They were joined by Magnus the Red and his 1,000 sons, now dedicated to the chaos-powered Tzeentch, his sons having collected the shards of their ruined father and reassembled him in the warp. Across the galaxy, conflict started to ramp down as theatres were bled dry of troops or their combatants attempted to reach Terra. The underground war on Calth finally came to a close as the Ultramarines, reinforced from within Ultramar, purged the remaining Wordbearers from the caverns, and the Loyalists finally took the lead in the Titan War in the Belt of Iron as the Cataclysm of Iron came to an end after the Siege of Graia. Finally, as the Death Guard fleet moved from the purging of Einix, they were becalmed in the warp, and through the manipulation of their first captain, Kalas Typhon, Mortarion pledged his legion to Nurgle.
Literally, I don't care how many times I hear about this guy. Legitimately, one of the most hateable beings in this entire damn story arc. I hate Typhus so much.
Everything was now focused on Terra, as in 14, the traitor fleet burned through the meager Loyalist defences that still remained in the solar system and opened 2 warp gates in system to allow their fleets to bypass the Mandeville points. A Sons of Horus fleet took Pluto, linchpin of the first sphere of defence, and an Iron Warriors fleet under Perturabo took Uranus in the second sphere as a
Perturabo took Uranus.
Swarm of Emperor's Children and renegade ships attacked the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. The Sons of Horus fleet then assailed Luna directly from the warp gates, taking over the ancient Selenar gene vaults as Shattered Legion forces managed to liberate the Magna Mater, the original genetic templates for the construction of the legions. Something the Loyalists would make use of thousands of years later. Overrunning the moon, the traitor fleet took position
Step Perturabo! No!
in orbit of Terra, and on the 13th of Secundus, the bombardment of Terra began. The Siege of Terra itself is such a huge conflict that it deserves its own video, but in short, the traitors, masterminded by Perturabo, systematically took apart the walls of the Emperor's palace, making gains with the taking of first the Lion's Gate and then the Eternity Wall spaceports, while Horus, Magnus, and the Wordbearers under Zardu Lyak attempted to weaken the Emperor's psychic barrier enough that their demonic allies might manifest. They were resisted by the Blood Angels, the White Scars, and the Imperial Fists, aided by the Legio Custodes, the Sisters of Silence, and the millions of remaining human troops. But the Emperor himself and the majority of his Custodes' bodyguard were engaged attempting to stop waves of demons from crashing through the webway barriers deep underneath the palace. The conflict ramped up for months as the traitors landed Dark Mechanicum siege engines, titans, and hordes of mutants and cultists, and the defenders were slowly bled dry. Angron, demon primarch of the Word Bearers, fought and was bested by Sanguinius of the Blood Angels at Eternity Gate. Magnus fought Vulcan deep within the webway. Fulgrim was beaten by Rogel Dawn on the walls of the palace and quit the battle, disappearing into the warp while his legion rampaged through the undefended citizenry outside the walls. Perturabo, incensed at his siege plans being bypassed and questioned by other traitor commanders, quit the battle and pulled his forces from the theatre, and Jagatai Khan of the White Scars banished Mortarion of the Death Guard during a daring recapture of the Lion's Gate port, but still the defenders were pushed back until all that remained.
Was Jagatai the first to defeat a demon Primarch? Because I know Sanguinius kills demon Primarch Angron at the Siege of Terra, but did Jagatai kill Mortarion first? I'm just curious. Random little detail that's like completely not important. I just am curious.
Was the inner palace itself. And through all this, Horus, swollen with the power of chaos, pit his mind against that of the...
You know, my daughter makes that face too when she's taking a shit. Just letting you know, my baby is, you know, that's the newborn. I made a poop face.
Emperor from it.
I just realized I made 2 poop jokes this stream. I think changing diapers has ruined me.
His flagship in orbit. But eventually, as the noose wound tighter and both sides bled themselves dry, the signal was received that the Ultramarines and Dark Angels fleets were finally inbound. And whether by coincidence or design, Horus dropped the shields of his flagship, enticing the Emperor to finally take the field. The Emperor's regent, Malcador the Sigillite, took his position on the Golden Throne as the Emperor, Dawn, and Sanguinius teleported onto the Vengeful Spirit. Fighting through hordes of demons, the Emperor finally reached Horus's throne room, only to find Sanguinius already dead by his hand. And though he killed the War Master, he was mortally wounded in return. The heresy ended there, with the death of Horus Lupercal at the hand of the Emperor. The Loyalist forces almost annihilated, and the traitor forces turned to chaos and disarray. The Imperium, the product of the Great Crusade, was a ruin. Worlds reduced to rubble and billions dead. In the years that followed, the Ultramarines and the remnants of the other Loyalist legions would hound the traitors back into the region of warp space known as the Eye of Terror. And the Imperium itself would slowly rebuild, but with the Emperor catatonic and half the Primarchs turned to chaos or dead, it would never again reach the heights it had just 14 years before at the triumph of Ullanor. The Emperor's great plan was over. His gamble to defeat chaos had failed, and the Imperium that emerged from the ruins would ponderously roll on, slowly crumbling under its own weight for the next 10,000 years. And it's interesting when it's recounted like that, just how that all happened. Horus might have engineered himself a perfect position at the start of the heresy. The Loyalists deliberately scattered. The original forces sent to stop him in the perfect position to be annihilated. At the start of the war, it seemed like he'd be hard to stop. But the traitors still needed to secure industrial bases and supplies from a galaxy that, initially at least, was still loyalist and maybe resisted the arrival.
That also plays into everything I was saying before. With how did people end up aligning with him?
The traitors more than was expected. By the time he'd massed enough resources and obtained enough dark power to march on Terra and challenge the Emperor, his army was falling apart. Chaos was taking its toll. His commanders were more fractious than ever. Lorgar exiled after a failed coup. Conrad Kurz captured. Alfarius dead. Perturabo quitting the siege after being treated even worse than he was under the Emperor. And 4 Primarchs turned into demons and working towards their own agendas. Which meant that while Terra was still grossly outnumbered, the 2 remaining Loyalist legions making their way through the Ruinstorm were a genuine threat, and turned the final siege into a race against time. Anyway, there we go. The Horus Heresy. As I said, the Siege of Terror could be a whole other one of these, but we've got a bit more information to be filled in before that becomes possible. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this mammoth story.
I really did.
And thanks for watching.
I love that. Okay. I really hope this does okay, because I actually really like Arbiter Ian. That was a great first experience with him. That was really, really good. Like, that was really, really good. I enjoyed every bit of that. As always, thank you for watching, and if you like the content, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. Until next time.